Hi, I'm Chef Danny, and today we are making soups. I'm going to teach you the techniques of making a great stock and 2 fabulous soups to make with that stock. Today we are making soup, and we're going to make stock as well. I'm going to show you how to make a stock from scratch, and you can freeze that stock and always have fresh stock whenever you want to make soup or to add to any dish that you're cooking, really. So you won't ever have to buy any again. We're going to make a chicken stock and a beef stock, and I'm going to show you how we do that. So first, I have a whole chicken here. Now this is a whole roasting chicken. You buy it in the store just like this, and we're going to take it and put it in the pan just like this. So it's not a lot of hard work to make the stock, plus we'll have the meat and everything left over that we can use for a soup later. We're also going to make a beef stock. Now to make a beef stock, you don't use the actual meat. You use really the bones of the meat. If you go to the butcher and ask the butcher for some bones from the beef, he will have these back in the back, and they're really cheap for you to buy. So this cost about $1 for me to get these bones. And you see they still have a little bit of the meat left on them, but not enough to really eat, but it's going to flavor that stock. So that's what you want, is the beef bones. You can also, if you've had a chicken, if you roasted a chicken, or maybe you bought a rotisserie and you ate the whole thing, save the bones from that, the carcass from that, and we can use that in our stock as well. So hold on to all that stuff. You can put it in the freezer until you're ready to make your stock. Now when we're making stock, we want to think about flavors that are going into our stock, but we don't have to work really hard chopping everything up. So we want to start with a little bit of garlic, and the way we want to put that in the pan is just to cut the top off and put it in just like this. You don't have to take the cloves out. You don't have to worry about cutting anything up. We're making a long cooking stock, so we're just going to put it in just like this with the skins and everything. We're going to strain it after it gets done, so we won't have to worry about any of that. So this goes in our bowl. We have celery also that we're going to use to put in our stock, and we don't have to worry about cutting it up small either. Big pieces. That in the bowl. Same with your onions. So you want to make sure that you have good size onions. These are not sweet onions. These are just regular yellow onions. You could use a sweet onion if you wanted to add a little sweetness to your broth. But what we're going to do with the onions is the same thing. We're leaving the skin, we're leaving the end, everything on the onion. We're just going to cut it in half. And we're going to go ahead and do 2 of those. All right, so we're always thinking about flavors when we're building a stock and we're building a broth. We want to make sure that we're infusing a lot of flavors into the liquid, and our liquid's going to be water. So all the flavor that we can put in there, that's going to infuse into our soup. So we have bell peppers, we have some carrots, all of your herbs and spices that have flavoring, that's what you want to add. And the same with the bell peppers. You want to take those and just cut them in half. Put them in there, seeds and all, that's fine. The carrots, you do the same thing. Cut them, put the whole thing in there. You don't have to worry about making sure everything's small. It's all going to get strained out. We're just going to get it to release all of those beautiful flavors. And the one thing I want to show you is something called a bouquet garni. This is going to go in our stock as well. And these are some herbs from the garden. I've got rosemary, there's a little sage, a little basil left over. It's getting a little late in the year, so we don't have a lot of herbs left, but whatever you have, you want that to flavor your stock as well. So we're going to tie this together. I have some twine, and we're just going to cut that and tie it into a little bouquet garni. Now the reason we're doing this is because, remember I told you we're going to strain everything out at the end anyway, so we don't want our herbs in there to be part of the soup. We'll add that later when we make our soup. We want just the flavor from the herbs. All right, now we have our little bundle. We'll throw that into our pot, and that's going to flavor our stock as well. So we've got our veggies cut up, we've got our bouquet garni, and we've got our meat ready to saute our mirepoix in the pot. So we're going to cut up a little bit of mirepoix to put in the pot to get started. We're going to peel some carrots. And what is mirepoix? Well, mirepoix is the base of all French cooking. It's what we start every pot with, or every pan, and it flavors all the way through every time. So it's usually carrots, onions, and celery. Here in the South, we do something called a trinity, and that we take the carrots out and put the bell pepper in. But for our soup, we're going to do carrots, onions, and the celery. Now this we do want to chop because this we're going to cook down for just a minute before we get our stock going. This is going to start to flavor the pan. You got to build your flavors inside the pan as you're cooking. So you want to make sure that you start with good flavors and build from there. All right. We're going to cut these into big chunks because the big chunks are going to break down into our soup. And once again, we're straining all this out. I'm also going to cut the carrot into big chunks. We'll cut the end off. And I'm going to do the same thing with our celery, and we're going to get that started in our pan over at the oven and get everything cooked off before we build our broth. We have our mirepoix in the pans, and we've been sauteing it off just to soften it up a little bit and to get some flavor into our pans. Remember, we're making a beef broth and a chicken broth, and these can be used for a bunch of different soups. But today we're making Italian wedding soup, and we're going to make a creamy broccoli cheese soup. So to get our broth started for our soups, we have these cooked down till they're softened for the mirepoix, and then we're going to start adding all the big chunks that we cut up earlier that we didn't take the skins off of, and we've got to add our meat also. So I have the whole roasted chicken here, and this is going to go in our bigger pot. We're just going to dump the whole thing in there. And then I have, remember, our beef bones that we're going to do our beef stock with, and that's going to go in here also. Now we need to add all the vegetables that we cut into the big chunks. Remember, we left the skins on, we left the stems on, we left all of that on. I've got our bouquet garnis also. And you can save scraps from vegetables when you cut up a celery or when you cut up lettuce or when you cut up onions or when you cut up garlic. Save all that. All that is flavor. Don't throw it away. The skins off of the carrot, when we peeled that, you can save that too and put it in your stock. It's all going to get strained out at the end. So I'm putting in the bell peppers and putting in the whole carrots. We're putting them all into the pot to add flavor. Then we're going to add water to this, and this is going to flavor our water. Now you want to make sure when you're making stock for your soups that you put a lot of salt into the stock. Not too much, but it's going to be a good amount. It's going to look like way more than you need. If you think about a lot of the stocks that you buy at the store, they have salt in them. And if you saw the amount that goes in there, you'd kind of be shocked. So when you're adding it yourself, you need to be pretty liberal with the salt as well. You don't want to over salt it, but you don't want to put a teaspoon either. So we want to sprinkle a good bit of salt over here. We're not going to add salt to our soup when we make it. It's going to come from our stock. The same with the chicken. Right over the top. It looks like a lot, I know, but we're watering that all down with water. Now for our chicken stock, I like to use mustard seeds in there as well. It gives it a little bit of flavor in the background. Just tiny mustard seeds. You can buy these at the store, and we're going to add them to our chicken stock over here. All right, so the only other thing we need to add is some water, and this water is going to be the base of our stock. Just pour that right over everything that we put into the pan. All right, I'm going to get some more water to fill up the chicken, and then I'm going to cover the beef with water as well, and then we're going to roll our little mini meatballs for our Italian soup. We have our broths cooking over on the range, and we're going to let them cook slowly. So while they're getting ready, we're going to get our meatballs ready for our Italian wedding soup. Now, Italian wedding soup really doesn't have anything to do with Italian weddings. I really don't know where the name came from. I just know it's a delicious soup. It's one of my favorites, and it's really easy to make. It uses a light beef broth. So when we made the beef broth, you'll notice I didn't brown off the meat first. Sometimes I roast the bones ahead of time in the oven, but we wanted a really light stock for this soup, so I just put them straight in the pan the way they were. What we're going to do now is make our meatballs. So what I have here is ground chuck. You want to use the ground chuck. It has a little bit less fat in it, but we still want some fat because that gives us all of our flavor. So I have ground chuck, and I also have an Italian sausage. Now, this Italian sausage was made at the shop, and they grind it all together, and you can see the great Italian seasonings in there. It has some great fennel and lots of Italian flavors. We're going to do equal parts for our little mini meatballs, okay? So we're going to take and put these together into the same bowl, and we want to mix them until you can't tell the difference in the two meats. Right now you can see there's a definite difference in the two colors. I'm going to mix them all together till you can't tell the difference in them. I have the meat all mixed together where you can't tell the difference in either one. You want it to be one consistent color because you don't want to separate the meat, and when you eat the meatball you don't want to have sausage or beef. You want it to all be together. So the sausage is the pork that adds a little fat and flavor, and then the beef is, you know, the main part of the meatball. So we're going to add some seasoning now. This is my secret seasoning. We're going to put a good bit of seasoning on there. We're going to add some minced garlic that I already minced up. And then we're going to add a little salt and pepper. We're flavoring our meatballs, and these are going to go into the soup. Or these are going to be little mini meatballs. They're not going to be full-size meatballs, but this is a good recipe if you want to make regular-size meatballs as well. We're going to go in with 1 egg. That's going to be a binder to help hold everything together. But because we're going in with an egg, and that's going to make it a little wet, we're going to add a little breadcrumbs also and get everything mixed together to make our mini meatballs. All right. Let's go in and get it all mixed together. I have all of our meat mixed together with all the seasonings, and the way you can check to see if it's going to taste good is by smelling the meat. So you want to smell, and if you smell all those seasonings and all those flavorings, that means it's going to taste pretty good too. So what we're making is mini meatballs. We don't want to make the large ones because they're going in a soup, and we want it to be like a bite size. So you want to get a little of the meat. It's going to be about a tablespoon, and you're going to roll it in your hands. Now, it needs the heat from your hands to help form the meatballs. It'll help them stick together better. Once you get them rolled, we're going to line them up on a tray. These are going to go in the oven at 350 for about 15 minutes before we put it into our pot to make our soup. And while those are baking off, we'll get our stalks off and strained, and then we'll get our soup started for our meatball soup and our broccoli cheese soup. Our stocks are ready, and now we're ready to put together our soups. So the stock, once you get it made, you can put that in the freezer for up to 3 months. You can store it in your fridge for up to a week, and you can use it for different things that you're cooking. We have our beef stock, and we have our chicken stock, and we're going to use one for each soup that we're making today. But like I said, you can use them for just about everything that you're cooking. So in the first pan, I have a little bit of olive oil and garlic, and that's going to be our pan for our Italian wedding soup. The next thing we want to put in there is our mirepoix. The mirepoix consists of carrots, celery, and onion. So you want 50% onion, 25% each of carrot and celery. And we're going to let that cook down for just a few minutes. In our back pot is where we're going to do our creamy broccoli cheese soup. So when you're starting with a creamy soup, you want to make sure that you use butter as your base instead of the olive oil. So I have some butter here. We're going to put a little bit of that in the pan. It's going to be about half a stick. And I've got garlic in that pan also. And we're going to go in there with the same thing. The carrots, the celery, and the onion. That's our mirepoix. That builds our flavors for just about every soup that you're going to make. So this needs to cook down for just a few minutes, and while it's cooking down, we're going to go ahead and add some things to our pot. Now in the back especially, we have broccoli. And we have fresh broccoli, so it needs time to cook down and soften in the soup. So we're going to go ahead and put it in with our mirepoix. You dump that in. And in the front pan, we're going to wait just a minute and let this cook down before we add any more vegetables, but we're going to go ahead and add our meatballs. Our meatballs came out of the oven. You can see what we did was just slightly brown them off. We're not trying to cook them. The inside of them will still be raw, but we're going to go ahead and add them to our pot now for our soup. There will be extra grease on your pan from the meatballs. That we don't want to put in the soup. It's fat from the meatballs, and it'll just end up coming to the top and floating on the top, and we don't want that. So leave it in your pan. You can use that later for something for cooking, but we want to put just the meatballs into our pan. Let them cook for just a few minutes with our vegetables, and then we're going to start adding our broth. Now the meatball soup, because it has the meatballs, it's going to get a beef broth. And then our broccoli soup, we're going to use the chicken broth. Now you could use a vegetable stock if you prefer not to have any meat. I just like the flavor of the chicken in there with the broccoli. All right, all those guys in. Let's get this stirred around. As soon as our veggies start to slightly cook down, we're going to go ahead and add our broth. And we need to definitely add our broth to the back pan with the broccoli, because the broccoli is going to cook down in that broth itself. And then we'll have to finish this off with some cream and some cheese. So I'm going to go ahead and add the chicken to the back. You can see our chicken is a nice light broth. Add the whole thing in there. You want to make sure that the broccoli's covered and everything has plenty of room to move around. We're just going to let that cook down for about 30-45 minutes. The same with our pan in the front. I have a beef stock going in here, right over the top of the meatballs. Now we're going to finish cooking these meatballs in this stock because they're not cooked in the center right now. We're cooking them down in the stock itself. There's one more step we're going to add to this at the very end, which is our fresh spinach, but we're going to wait till the end for that one also. So these have about 45 minutes, and when we come back, we'll be plating up all of our beautiful soups. Our soups have been cooking down for about 45 minutes now. The meatballs are completely cooked and our broccoli is nice and soft. And remember I said we had a few more things we had to do to these pans. The first thing we need to do to the broccoli soup, because we want to thicken it up a little bit, we're going to put something in there called a beurre meni. A beurre meni is equal parts of butter and flour mixed together, and what this is going to do is thicken our soup. There's a couple of different ways that you can thicken things. You can use a liaison, you can use a roux, or you can use a beurre meni. And the beurre meni we're going to put into the broccoli soup, and we're going to let that thicken up before we add our cream. We've still got to add cream and cheese to the soup because it's a broccoli cheese soup. So this is going to serve as a thickener. We'll get that in there and move it around. It's going to melt the butter. Mixing the butter with the flour like that helps to keep it from lumping up. So we're going to get that in the pan and let that thicken up just a minute. Now in our front pan, we have our meatballs, and they have completely cooked in our broth with our vegetables and our mirepoix. Now we're going to add some spinach to this pan. And you want to add a good bit of spinach. This looks like a giant bowl of spinach, but when you cook it down, it doesn't turn into that much. So we're going to add this to the soup. It's going to cook right down in that soup. And as soon as that spinach gets cooked down, then this soup will be done. So you'll see the spinach will start to break down and cook down, and it'll be time to plate our soup. That was our lesson for today. We learned how to make stock and soup. We made chicken stock and we made a beautiful beef stock, and we used those to make two separate soups. An Italian wedding soup with the beef stock and the broccoli cheese soup with the chicken stock.